I think we're building on some momentum, recent momentum in local history in general, but also some recent momentum regarding the history of the United States Colored Troops, the two regiments that were raised here during the Civil War, specifically the 110th and 111th U.S. Colored Infantry Regiments. This is a story that for me personally has been little told and not as well known, even locally, as should be. So this also gives us an opportunity, this project gives an opportunity for us to build some momentum on those efforts that we've made already, the most significant of which was the vision of Miss Vivian Sims.
But if you walk around any place, a big city, a small town, with black people or white people or any people, and ask what's the United States Colored Troops, not one of them will know what it is. And if that one does know, they make up something and make you think they know something. And that was me. There's a very historic building, built in 1835. And right behind the building is a very tall hill where 2,400 former slaves joined the Union Army. 20,000 joined in the state of Tennessee. And 200,000 former slaves joined the Union Army in the United States. And I told them how important it is for black children, particularly black boys, to learn that their ancestors were brave warriors and not just slaves. But every black child and every black person who finds out that their ancestors were brave warriors, and because they fought and they died, we are free and we are not slaves today. We are free.
He was mustered in at Richland Station and then was trained in Pulaski. So it all starts at the plantation of Larkin Carden, or one of his sons, in the southeast of Giles County. Alexander was a slave, agricultural. He was freed when the Union occupied the county during the Civil War and went on to fight in Alabama against Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was eventually captured, became a Confederate prisoner of war and survived, was recaptured by the Union, and after ending his period of service, came back to live in Pulaski. He set down roots here. He married an Alabamian named Melinda Mays, was married at what is now a Campbell AME church, lived with 7 other people bearing the Carden name. These were probably others who were formerly enslaved at that same plantation, who he established firm bonds with. He also established firm bonds with his USCT veteran comrades. In the years that would follow between 1872 and 1874, he acted as a witness so that they could receive their pensions from the Freedmen's Bureau. He was also so beloved in Pulaski that when he was falsely accused of theft in 1872, a petition was signed by Pulaski citizens so that he could be freed from jail. Unfortunately, he died in 1876, a pretty early death, but was remembered by his family, including multiple children. One, Alec Carden, applied for his pension in 1891, and they applied for his gravestone in 1888, where the gravestone remains to this day, which I discovered as part of the Maplewood GPS survey.
I knew a few things, but I didn't know anything about the Pulaski story, not a thing. But in searching for his grave, as I was getting ready to present information to my classes, I stumbled across this amazing place. And as I walked around, my eye was drawn to the white colored stones which are scattered all around it. And I discovered a common thing on all of them. They were members of some military unit, and I had information that this had been the Black Cemetery. I don't remember where I learned that, but I knew that. And I started putting two and two together and realized these had to have been black troops who served in the Union Army. And I was instantly intrigued. That's what started me down this path.
What we found is that he was most likely born on the Bat family plantation in Virginia, and then the Bat family moved to Giles County, Tennessee, and he came along with, is where he became a farm slave for Dr. William Bat here of Pulaski. And then in December 1864, Bat enlists into the USCT here in Pulaski, and then he musters in January 1st. And then immediately after he enlists, I think January 22nd, he gets put on detached duty. Being on detached duty, he could have been any number of things. He could have been in logistics. He could have had a guard posting here in Pulaski. He could have been a scout. He could have went on supply runs. He could have done any number of things. But I think one of the most interesting things about him is his age. Because at the time of his enlistment, he was 43 years of age, whereas most other people in his company were in their mid-20s, early 30s. And that may have been a reason why he was put on detached duty. He did not go with the rest of the company to Alabama and then eventually to Georgia with Sherman, and so his entire military experience was here in Pulaski. He never left. He would serve for 3 years, and then after his service was up in 1866, where he mustered out in Huntsville, Alabama, he just spent the rest of his life here in Pulaski with his wife, Louisa. And from what we can infer where his headstone is in Maplewood Cemetery, he continued to stay with the Bat family until the time of his death, which there was no record of his death or Louisa's death. But it is interesting that his headstone was found in the old white part of the cemetery in Maplewood, which is not very common. So we can infer that he was really, really close with the Bat family, and the family wanted him buried with them.
We believe Gilmore was born on the plantation of Giles Reynolds, which is located in Reynolds Station, which is just north of Pulaski, Tennessee. He was a waiter by occupation prior to the war, which means he was likely a house slave working among his white owners. In December of 1863, Gilmore would enlist at Reynolds Station in Giles County in Company B of the 110th. He would be active in the regiment for about 4 months until he would be diagnosed with an illness that is unknown to us. He would be transported in multiple hospitals throughout the war, and he would be discharged in Huntsville in 1866. After the war, he would return to Giles County and would work under David Osborne Reynolds, who was the son of Giles Reynolds. This would be under the Freedmen's Bureau. David would pass away in 1868. Next time Gilmore appears on the historical record is in the 13th District around Beaufort Station. He was living with a family of African-American Reynolds. This may have been close relatives, or it could have been close friends from his pre-war days. It was not uncommon for African-Americans to form communities after the war for protection and safety. He also lived with the white family of Robert Sanders. It was there he served as a house servant. This does give echoes of his pre-war life. He may have been rented out to the Sanders family before, so he may have been familiar with them, which is why he's living with them. Gilmore would be married 3 times throughout his life. Once to Buchanan, who passed away within 2 years of their marriage. Could have passed away in childbirth or by illness. His second wife, Mary Buford, was a widow of one of his former comrades, and she would pass away too shortly after their marriage. And his third and final wife, Bella Atkins, he would live with her till his death in 1915, and he'd be buried in Maplewood Cemetery.
What we did is we set aside all of these points, and we hired a company out of Alabama to come in and do this for us. And so we geo-rectified every point on these corners, and then my students helped run the magnetometer. You can see this little area right here where they lost some data. So that tells you how much data was picked up at every pass.
Benjamin Nelson was born in Arkansas, which is very fascinating to see how he traveled from the west and came to the south. He enlisted in Limestone, Alabama. He enlisted on December 30th, 1863, and he served for 3 years in the United States Colored Troops. With him being a first sergeant, we can assume that he was an educated man because he would have had to have been able to read the orders he was given. He would have been able to write to his commanders to let them know what was happening. During the war, Benjamin Nelson was captured in Athens, Alabama. And sometime between his first capture and being recaptured down in Mobile, he was able to escape, which allows us to know that he was physically and mentally capable of escaping from the Confederate troops. He made it through the war, and after the war he settled in Pulaski, Tennessee, where he married a woman named Ada Nelson. We do know that after the war, Benjamin Nelson was still a prominent figure within the community and still had ties to many of the men that he served with. He was actually a participant in the January 7th, 1868 Pulaski riot. It took place off the square. It was a group of former USCT soldiers and a group of Confederate veterans who were fighting. They call it a riot. It was more or less a shootout between these two groups. The USCT soldiers were actively fighting against a group of known Ku Klux Klan members. One of the original 6 Ku Klux Klan members, Kennedy, was one of the participants on the Confederate soldier side. Tensions got extremely high. There were several that were injured. Nelson was one of the ones who was severely injured, which could be cause for what eventually led to his death 6 years later.
David was born here in Giles County on the McKissick plantation. Whenever the McKissick daughter married a Chairs out of Murray County, he moved up there with her, became a Chairs, and as the Union Army moved south during the initial phases of the war, David followed them along down south to Pulaski, where in December of 1863 he enlisted in the United States Colored Troops. He served there throughout Tennessee and Alabama, was captured by Nathan Bedford Forrest at the Battle of Sulphur Creek Trestle, was a POW in Mobile, Alabama, where he escaped, walked his way back to Pulaski, and re-enlisted in the USCT. He fought the remainder of the war in and around Tennessee. After the war, he settled down near Vale's Mill in Pulaski, where he was a laborer for several years, got into some contractual disagreements with a man, which ended up in the court cases here. The court case is Anderson v. Chairs. It was, he had entered into a contract to work a piece of land for an Anderson man, and the Andersons ended up not paying him, so he took them to court over it. They then, a couple months after a barn burned down, blamed it on him with no other evidence, locked him in jail until he would drop the charges, and the case was ultimately dropped against the Andersons. And then the Andersons would keep on and have him convicted for burning the barn down, despite no other evidence than just hearsay. He lived a quiet remainder of his life here. He married a woman named Fanny Brown, adopted her 2 children, and raised them as his own. The census records show them living together, him helping raise some of his grandchildren that were born. And he would eventually own a farm here on Spear Street, right from where the USCT monument now stands today. And he would die there in the early 19-teens of pneumonia, and his family would move out of Pulaski after that. And so those can symbolize a lot of the tensions that were in this community after the Civil War. The tensions between some of the former slaveholders and the slaves themselves, the tensions between Unionists and Confederates, and the tensions that would remain here for years and years to come.
And so at this cemetery so far, we found that a lot of these burials, I can make out both the grave shaft and the individual in them, or at least the reflection of where the individual would have been placed. And that's interesting because in a lot of cemeteries, you get either the grave shaft indication or you get the reflection off of the human remains that are left around. And it's very rare that you get such consistency where you see both at the same time. So there are a lot of things that we look at when we determine whether or not things could be unmarked graves. So the reflection, shape, size, and how intense it is when it comes back to the surface, that's also often an indicator. Both it's an unmarked grave or potentially an unmarked grave, but as well as the existence of any sort of coffin or anything like that that may have deteriorated. In more formal situations like this one, it could very well be that a lot of individuals were buried in coffins, but I have encountered cemeteries where individuals, even from living memory, folks would tell me that they could remember their grandparents being buried and they would just be wrapped in sheets instead of being buried in coffins. So it seems here that if the individuals were buried in some sort of casket or coffin, it's likely rotted away.
Large pit, ditch, whatever you want to call it, with multiple burials in it. So that's significantly different, right, than what we found in other parts of the cemetery so far. How to interpret that, I don't know yet, but contextually I find it interesting because we're literally feet from the boundary line of the city limits, the old city limits. We're in the sort of African-American portion of the cemetery. And we're buried next to other known USCT burials, so the contextual clues are interesting. What we've got going on here is that we are literally, within feet here of the historic boundary, southern boundary for the city of Pulaski, and that's significant for the cemetery for a couple of reasons. But if you come up here and just stand on it, so there's the corner marker for the original, I guess we call that the southeastern boundary, the one that's marked historical site right there. Is the southeastern boundary line of the old plot of the city of Pulaski. So we're now standing on the southern boundary, and you can notice even visually when you look at the cemetery on this side, it looks a certain way, right? And then you look at the cemetery on this side and it looks significantly different, and there's a reason for that. And that's because historically what you have are white burials right on this side and then African-American burials on this side. It was all about maps, as you might imagine. In the Army, we were mapping everything that we could in as much detail as we could, because what a map allows you to do is to see in a single simple viewing a full range of information in patterns that you may not be able to see if you're just looking at the information itself.
That's got the data in it that you want to show, and you give it a title, a legend, north, south, east, west, and then you give your methodology. And that's what my class did. So we helped with the actual data gathering, and then we helped georectify, and then we helped build the map. Okay. Now, ongoing, it doesn't show in a dead map like this, but if you're looking at the online version of this and you click on one of these things, it gives you all the information. And that's what my students did as well. They put in, this is Bob's grave, he was in this regiment or whatever, and it comes up as a piece of information here in the live map. And so in order to bring this out and discover this, we are actually uncovering another point of view in that story of Pulaski and Giles County.
We're not going to find out everything about everybody, but we're going to find as much as we can about these men and tell a more complete story as we move forward. This is just the beginning. It's not the end of the project. There will be many more years of this going forward.
And our students have such an opportunity to learn by being involved in this process, learning about the technology, ground penetrating radar, magnetometry, GIS, database building, historical research, creative writing. I mean, there's so much of this learning going on for the students here with the university. So And it's a collaborative project, which is really important too. It crosses disciplines within the university. The fact that we're collaborating as faculty, the fact that our students are collaborating across disciplines is really sort of exciting, I think, from a university perspective too. It's collaborative in terms of its funding as well, and supported by the provost and the university. And so we just sort of put our collective hats together and try to figure out how to make it happen. This project is not my vision; it's a vision of Dr. Harwell and Professor Wakefield for years now.
And it's time for us to recognize that these men fought for their freedom, and that's something worth honoring, and that's what we're trying to do.
This is not just a history project. It's not just a technology project. It's not just a pedagogical project, a way to teach students, but it's also a veterans project. You know, we're talking about folks who fought for the United States Army during the U.S. Civil War. The same flag that I fought under was the flag that they were fighting under, and they were fighting for their freedom.